In this session, we'll be talking about uh, patterns of human settlements. And we'll talk about patterns with reference to the spacing and shape of settlements. A pattern is basically a very regular, intelligible placement of settlements or arrangement of settlements. So how settlements are arranged or placed uh, in relation to each other uh, give rise to a peculiar layout or a peculiar shape, and that leads to that gives a settlement its particular pattern. It can be discussed in two basic ways. For example, when we look at within the city, then we can try to find out how different buildings, different houses within the city or within the settlement are placed in relation to each other. Are they located, are the houses or buildings are too close to each other, or are they away from each other? So what is the spacing between them? Or is there any particular shape of a settlement? So in terms of, say, of different English alphabets, settlements which is of C size, C shape, English alphabet C, or settlements having S shape, etc. So based on that, one can look at different kind of patterns. Even at regional scale, we can look at a big region and we can see how different settlements as a whole are placed or arranged in relation to each other, again with reference to spacing between or among the settlements, as well as different shapes of those settlements. So patterns can be understood in terms of spacing and in terms of shape, or as we call it, morphology. When we talk about pattern of settlement based on spacing, we are basically referring to the distance between or among the settlements. And distance is nothing but the degree of separation. So when we say that two houses or two settlements are separated from each other or are located at quite a distance, it talks about the degree of separation, how far or how close they are located from each other. Now, when we look at it, look at the pattern of settlement with reference to spacing or distance between them, there are two basic kinds of processes, or let us say two basic kinds of patterns can be identified. One is a process of dispersion. Dispersion is a process where the settlements tend to move away from each other. So settlements show a lot of distance or a very high degree of separation between them, and such settlements are called as dispersed settlements, or having a dispersed pattern of settlement. The process responsible is dispersion, moving away from each other. Exactly opposite to it, we have a process of agglomeration, or coming closer to each other. So certain settlements may be very close to each other, where the process of agglomeration is active. Such settlements are called as nucleated settlements or nucleated patterns, or there may be some settlements which may tend to place themselves away from each other, where the process of dispersion is active, and such settlements are called as dispersed pattern. Now, Ahmad and R.L. Singh in 1950s have classified patterns of settlements in four broad categories. The first one is nucleated or compact or agglomerated settlements. Second is semi-compact or composite settlement. Third is fragmented or hamleted settlement. And third is dispersed or scattered settlements. If you look at these four in opposite way, it becomes a bit easier to understand. So if you start with dispersed settlements, the settlements which are away from each other, located away from each other with lot of distance or spacing between them. And then as the population increases, as those settlements starts growing economically or demographically, we find gradually those settlements tend to come closer to each other. So a dispersed settlement gradually turns to a nucleated settlement. And in this process, we find two subtypes or two stages that lead to a very unique pattern. So as you can see in this simple chart, a dispersed settlement, where you can see a settlement with where almost single houses or very 2 to 3 houses at the most located close to each other. But overall, we can see the settlements are quite away from each other. So as they are away, the process of dispersion is active. Now, as these individual units start growing gradually in due course of time, these single settlements then they turn into hamlets. So in the second sketch, you can see that the settlements are hamleted. Here you can see only one hut or only one settlement. But here then you can see that the one turns into 4, 2, 3. So each settlement starts growing gradually. So an isolated settlement takes a shape of a hamlet. And these hamlets are located at certain distance from each other. So we call them as such pattern as hamleted pattern or hamleted settlement. Now, out of these 3-4 settlements, hamleted settlements, one settlement maybe will grow in bigger size. It will become more dominant as compared to the rest of the settlement. So that may give rise to a semi-compact settlement. So when you find it has got one settlement which is of relatively larger size, and then it has got 2 settlements which are located not too close to this main settlement which is of large size. So these 2 pockets, these 2 settlements show some degree of dispersion, and while this settlement completely show a very high degree of agglomeration or of coming together, but the entire settlement is not compact. It's not is not very closely spaced, and therefore we call it as a semi-compact. And lastly, we find compact settlement, where a settlement grows economically, commercially, demographically, and becomes a large settlement. Compact settlement, where we find that the spacing or the distance between and among settlement considerably reduces. So if you look at it as a process from how a settlements in a particular region are dispersed, how they gradually grow to become hamleted settlements, then to semi-compact, and then finally the compact settlement, it will be a little easier to understand the concept of pattern. Now let us discuss briefly these 4 patterns one by one. The first one is dispersed settlement, also called as scattered settlements. I have already told you, these are the settlements where the spacing between the houses or spacing between the settlements is quite large. And the settlements usually consist of a single house or isolated huts, or it may also have a very small group of houses, may vary from just 2 settlements to 7 settlements scattered over quite a vast area. Now, such kind of dispersion, such kind of tendency to move away from each other may be a result of a number of factors. For example, in a very rural area, the farm sizes are so large that farmers tend to stay over the farm instead of staying somewhere else. And therefore, a settlement or a house or a farmer's house located in between, surrounded by his farmland. And then we find after a considerable distance, another farmland with the house of a farmer. So it gives rise to a more scattered or a more dispersed kind of a pattern. Sometimes there are certain historical factors because of which the settlements in the area tend to be away from each other. Or sometimes whenever planning is done, in many Western countries, for example, even the rural areas are very well planned. Now, in such kind of planning, it may be a planning decision to keep the settlements away from each other instead of leading to bringing them too close and leading to congestion and other related issues. In certain settlements are enclosed. They are enclosed by a kind of a fencing, or they're enclosed by a wall, and such kind of walling or fencing of buildings or of settlements also give rise to the process of dispersion. It also can be a result of overpopulation, that the settlement grows so heavily that people tend to stay away from each other to reduce the congestion. Now, this is only possible if the land available is vast. So if you have a very continuous, vast expanse of land, then there's a lot of scope for dispersion. However, if you have very small, compact land, such as an island, so where you have very limited scope or almost no scope to grow horizontally after certain point in time, then such settlements do not lead to a dispersed settlement. In India, there are a number of examples or areas where such kind of settlements are found. Almost in every state, Indian state, you find such settlements are there. But to give a few examples, dispersed or scattered settlements are found in the tribal areas of northern West Bengal, Chotanagpur Plateau, central India, or hilly regions of the Himalayas and the eastern states, Western Ghats, Western Malwa Plateau, the Thar Desert. Now, if you actually look into each and every of these, the names of these areas, then you will find how different factors are playing a role in dispersion. For example, when we talk about Himalayas, when we talk about Western Ghats, so we are talking about the hilly terrain that itself leads to dispersion. So there is no continuous flat land available for compaction, and therefore settlement attempt to disperse from each other. Or areas like Thar Desert, which are a very inhospitable or inhabitable climatic conditions because of a desert kind of an environment. And again, then obviously such factors also will lead to dispersion and not compaction. These are some of the images, symbolic images, just to tell you how a dispersed landscape looks like. The next type is called as fragmented or hamleted. As we have seen hamleted settlements, so it means that there are several hamlets, and these several hamlets together form a settlement. Okay, but these hamlets are not compact; they are not very close to each other, but they are away from each other, as you can see in the sketch which we have seen earlier. And therefore, which one of these hamlet is actually the main village or a main settlement is quite difficult to find out. Now, this kind of hamleted pattern may be caused again because of vast expanse of farmlands, or there may be lowlands, or there may be some physical barriers in between that separate those hamlets from each other. Maybe based on the pattern of stream in these areas, or mainly based on the tracks or the pathways according to which the settlements have evolved. And so there is a fragmented or hamleted kind of a pattern. In India, we find such pattern to a very large extent in the Gangetic Plains, especially in eastern Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, and parts of West Bengal. Again, a symbolic image to talk about the fragmented nature of settlement. The next one is a semi-compact settlement, also called as the composite settlement. As I told you, that there is one larger settlement and there are two smaller settlements, and all this put together they form one settlement. So there are these two are very small. They are part of the main settlement, but as you can see, they are located away from each other. So you find that one or two hamlets are situated away from the main village or the main settlement, while the main settlement is very compact. So here you can see that the houses are located very close to each other, leading to compaction. But still there are few hamlets which are not a part of this compact settlement, but they are little away from each other. One can say that semi-compact settlement is a kind of a intermediate stage, as I was telling before, between nucleation and dispersion. And here you can see the main village, the main or the compact village is very well connected with these hamlets by a footpath or a bullock cart if it's a rural settlement. Now, this kind of a semi-compact pattern is caused by multiple factors. In India, especially, caste play a very significant role. Therefore, the very social geography of the settlement or of a village leads to such kind of pattern, where the people belonging to a particular caste tend to live outside the main village and at a certain distance. So when we have a societies, rural societies, very strictly based on caste, we find such kind of patterns are quite visible in many such Indian rural settlements. Many a times because of certain reasons, maybe natural or maybe human, it happens that the compact village breaks into pieces. So there may be that the earlier village is very compact, and from there the two hamlets got separated, or the people went out of that village and settled to form two new hamlets. Now that may happen because of natural increase in population, and people may tend to move away to avoid that crowding or congestion, or it may also happen because of migration. So the migrants coming to this particular settlement, not settling or living in the main village, but they choose to live little away from the main village. So such factors also lead to semi-compaction or composite settlements. Similarly, as I was telling you, the physical features, there may be a valley in between, or there may be a water body in between, or there may be certain a differential elevation because of which the settlement tend to break or look like a semi-compact or a composite kind of a pattern. So here you can see that there is one big settlement located here, one more settlement located here, with one more part here. So you can see that, and this is entirely a sloping area. So according to the changing elevation, we find different parts of the settlement are located a bit away from each other. Not too far from each other like dispersion, but in a semi-compaction format. The last pattern is called as the nucleated settlement or compact settlement or agglomerated settlement, where we find that the spacing between and among the houses or spacing between and among the settlement remains too low, too little. So the houses or the settlements are very close to each other. And this kind of a pattern is very common in different parts of the world, especially in India, much common than the dispersed settlement. Now, the factors, the very basic factors responsible such pattern is obviously the human nature to remain social, because we always want to live closer to each other together so that there can be sharing possibly, or we find more protection in being together. So this basic social nature of human beings is one of the factors that responsible where people tend to prefer compaction or a compact settlements. So as I was mentioning, it may be because of need of defense or farming organization, because in case of very poor societies, poor farming societies, if there is compaction, then farmers tend to share the tools and implements so that the farming becomes easier. So the organization of farming becomes easier with compaction. Sometimes there may be physical limitations to the site. As I was talking about, that there may be a very small island, and so because it's an island, there is no scope for further growth, and therefore the settlements remain compact or very close to each other. Such settlements are, as I mentioned, are very widespread, very common in different parts of the country. But to give specific examples, in the Ganga Valley, right from Punjab to West Bengal, or Assam, Tripura, coastal Odisha, Mahanadi Basin in Chhattisgarh, Kaveri Basin in South India. These are some of the areas where the nucleated settlements are observed. So again, a symbolic picture of how a nucleation, how compaction. So one can see how settlements are located so close to each other, extremely dense kind of a habitation. This is an aerial picture of a village where again one can see a entire area. The village is surrounded by vast farmlands, and but the village is very compact. And I hope you can also observe a kind of a shape to this village. So this village is not just compact, but you can see that it is quite linear. It is like a line. It is located in a single line. Okay, so this is another way of looking at pattern. So we can look at pattern from the point of view of how close or how far the settlements are located from each other. And another way of looking at pattern is trying to find out shapes, as we have seen here, a very linear kind of a shape. So shape is a very significant aspect of or is one of the significant way and very common way rather of looking at pattern, because every settlement as it grows from an isolated hut to hamlet to a village, a small village, a large village, and then to town, and further different urban forms, we find it goes on changing its shape depending upon earlier. I mean, in case of rural settlements, we find that the shape is largely determined by the topography, the landforms, while as the rural settlement grows to become urban, then the factor that determines the shape become less natural but more human, such as the road and the street layouts, etc. So because of that, the settlements attain a particular shape. For example, settlements that are located along a river or a settlement that are located along the coastline, so they look like a linear pattern. For this particular settlement which we just now saw in earlier slide, so this is linear, this is line shape, right? And therefore such settlements are called as a linear pattern. The factors that are responsible for such pattern may be different. For example, it can be a river or it can be a coastline. It can be a straight road also, along which the settlement has developed. If any settlement has developed around a tank, around a water tank, when we say tank, it is a human construction, artificial construction, not natural. So tanks of square size or rectangular size and a settlement which is located around it also looks like a square shape or rectangular shape settlement. Oxbow lakes, where we have seen that the rivers meander, and during the meandering, the river forms oxbow lakes. So the settlements that are located along the oxbow lake also attains C shape or C kind of a pattern of settlement. T junction, where the two roads connect with each other in right angles, and therefore a settlement along these two roads, which is one is horizontal and other is vertical, connecting the road in right angle, give rise to a T shape or a T shape pattern. In a road that passes through mountain, usually in a zigzag motion, the S-shaped roads, especially through the mountain passes, the road is quite curvy. We find that the settlements located along such road attains S shape. So we call it as a S-shaped pattern. Certain settlements attains radial pattern or radial or star shape. Now it occurs when the roots are very centripetal. So we find that roots coming from different direction, converging at a particular point, give rise to a radial or a star-shaped settlement pattern. As I was mentioning earlier, if the roads are straighter and a settlement has developed along the road, then we find the development of linear pattern. So you can show these patterns with simple sketches. Even earlier, as I was showing you, dispersed, fragmented, hamleted, with a simple hand-drawn sketches. Even these different patterns that we have seen just now also can be shown with a different sketches. And you can draw these sketches in examination as well to support your answer, because it also will aid or it will also help you to remember these shapes better. So there can be different kind of patterns based on shape: linear, rectangular, square, star or radial shape, T shape, C shape, S shape, checkerboard pattern, terrace pattern, fan shape pattern. If a settlement is located over an alluvial fan. So we find that it will lead to a fan shape. So different shape settlements having different shapes, which is a result of physical as well as human factors. So let's check few images to understand this. So you can see this image where one can see a road passing through, and the settlements are located along the road. As you move away from the road, you can see that the number of houses or the density of settlement decreases on both the sides. So we can see a more concentration of settlements or houses along the road, and that give rise to a linear shape or a linear pattern. Here one can very easily see a rectangular pattern. So one can see a rectangles and a houses or settlements developed in such areas. Now, we all know that whenever settlements are planned, so they are planned in such a way, in a very geometric shapes. And where a particular part of the settlement is it develops for a particular purpose of use or a land use. So residential areas, for example, develop into such kind of patterns. So if the roads, the way the roads are connecting with each other, as you can see, 90-degree or a right angle, so they form either squares or rectangles, and therefore the overall the appearance of the settlement is also of that shape. Similar again, city with a very unique shapes and rather uniformity, as you can observe, uniformity of shapes, which is one of the feature of planned cities. Here you can see a very circular patterns. The roads are of very unique patterns, and so you can see the roads coming from the background of the photo straight to foreground, or of connecting both the edges. But in between you can see a very circular pattern, right? So all these are patterns based on shape we are talking about. This is another one. You can very clearly see a very clear square in between, right? So this is clearly a square. But if you observe these farm boundaries, then you can see that it also looks like as if these boundaries are converging at a particular place. So if you look at take a wider picture, it looks like a radial settlement, right? But the center of the settlement is very square shape. This is again the circular shape. And in this earlier circular shape, we find that the circles are deformed due to the roads that are passing through that circle. But in this case, you can see the circles are very well aligned. It looks more like a concentric circles. And the pattern of the roads also adds to this kind of a pattern or this kind of a shape. This is meandering I was talking about. So when a river meanders, it takes a C shape. And so the settlements which are located along the bank of such river also attains C shape. So these are C-shaped settlements. This is similar. Again, you can see a river is meandering, and along the river you can see a line of settlement that may lead to a C-shaped kind of a settlement. This is a beautiful example of an alluvial fan. So you can see this entire alluvial fan being developed, and therefore settlements developed on such alluvial fans, they attain fan shape. So depending upon various natural as well as human factors, settlements attain different shapes, and according to that, we can refer such settlements with different patterns. So in this session, we have seen that patterns is all about how the buildings or houses inside a settlement or in a particular region, how different settlements are spaced or arranged in relation to each other, either in the context of distance from each other, spacing from each other. So we have seen how a dispersed settlement gradually gets transformed into a nucleated settlement, and in between passes through two important stages of hamleted settlements and semi-compact settlements. And another way of looking at pattern is, as just now we have seen, with the help of different shapes of the settlement, which is a out product of natural as well as human So I hope you have understood this topic. Again, as usual, if you have any doubts, not understood anything, you can very well get in touch with me. Thanks a lot.